Man, you guys can be seated. Well, good morning. It's good to be back. If you're a guest with us, as Cody said, man, we're so glad that you're here. My name is Ben, and I serve as the pastor here, and I'm so glad to be home. Last week, my wife and I got a chance to slip off for a couple of days, and so much appreciative of that. Appreciate Cody filling in and taking care of the preaching duties last week, and always good to know you got guys behind you that can fill in, and I sure appreciate them and all that he does and our other staff do to make things happen week to week on that. So, but it's good to be back home, and I love being here at First Baptist Sterlington. I was thinking this week, just reflecting back, and for those of you that don't know, I've been here about 8.5 years, be 9 at the end of March of 2023, and man, it is home for me. And so when I say it's good to be home, I don't just mean where I work. I mean where I live and the family that I get to be a part of here at First Baptist. And so, man, it is so good to be here. And I am grateful to God for the ways that He allows me to be a part of this. When I left Sterlington, I graduated from Sterlington in 2000 and left, had no intention of ever returning other than for holidays because my grandparents still live here. And God has a sense of humor. Best laid plans, right? And 9 years after coming back in 2014, or 8.5, man, I'm so glad to be here and would not want to be anywhere else. I told somebody the other day that if the Lord wanted to move me, He'd have to send me an email and He'd have to include my Social Security number. So I'd know it was from Him. But man, I'm so glad to be here and glad to be back today. If you've got your Bible, John chapter 13. John chapter 13. Let's jump in together. We've been walking through the Gospel of John for a long time, and so I hope you're not tired of it. I've enjoyed walking through this. We've taken some breaks, and over the last couple of weeks, we kind of stepped away, but back today, John chapter 13, we'll look at verses 1 through 17 in our time together. I'm not going to read all of those to begin, but I'll give you a second to turn there. If you don't have a Bible, you might look in the chairs in front of you. You'll find a couple of Bibles there, and you're welcome to take that today and to use it. If you don't have one at home and you've been saying, hey man, I really would like to have a Bible, I'd love to have one to read, we'd love for you to take that Black Pew Bible with you today. It's our gift to you. You don't have to bring it back. We would love for you to take that and let that be your Bible for now. And please know that you're not taking from us. We're giving that to you. So if you need one, feel free to grab that and use it. But John chapter 13, and I titled today's message, Me First. Me First. No, that is not a picture of me jumping off of a cliff. Some of y'all are thinking, Ben doesn't do heights. I'm not doing that. That's not happening. If you ever see a picture of me doing this, I was pushed. Just know that. So find out who pushed me. But me first, I want to talk to you about that today because we live in a world that really is me first, right? Like when you look at all of the struggles going on worldwide, from the smallest scale conflict to the most large major thing happening in our world, at some point along the way, it became about somebody's individual right or somebody's individual opinion. It became about me, right? All conflicts have their root in some form of me first. A few years ago, my family and I went to Disney World, and we had the chance to go down and Slinky Dog. I don't know if you've ever been to Disney World, but the Toy Story animal Slinky Dog has a roller coaster. And when we were planning our trip, we were told, hey, look, you can get a fast pass, but the best way to get on the Slinky Dog is to get up early and to be there for what they call the rope drop. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but the rope drop is insane at Disney World. The rope drop is there's a rope that they literally hold up across the entrance of that particular park. This one was Hollywood Studios. And you line up there, and you want to be the first one at the rope because when the rope drops, you can enter the park, and everything's open, and you can go choose your ride and get on what you want to. And so our planner told us, be there for rope drop, and when the rope drops, she said this, sprint to Slinky Dog. I thought she was exaggerating. So we get up early and we make it there for rope drop, and we're in line. We are not the first ones, but we're only, I would say 4 or 5 people deep maybe. And the rope drops and I drug my family. Let's go. Here we go. And we sprint to Slinky Dog and we get to ride Slinky Dog. But I was thinking about that this week and just about the reality of, man, that rope drop moment really is kind of a picture of the world in which we live. Why do people show up for the rope drop? Because they want to be first. I want to ride it before everybody else. You can get a fast pass. I'm still amazed by this. You can get a fast pass, which tells you can ride it from like, let's just say 12:10 to 12:25. You show up, you get in the shorter line, you walk to the front of the line, you get on the ride, no problem. But people want to race. Little people, big people, tall people, short people, wide people, thin people, they all want to race. And when that rope drops, it's about getting there as fast as you can. And I thought, man, that's just the way we live our lives sometimes. We live our lives with this me first mentality. Man, I've got to be ready, and I've got to make sure I get my family and my life, and I have all the things that I need. And so it's just this me first culture. And let me just kind of give you some encouragement this morning. That's not new to the world in which we live. You and I do not live in a culture that all of a sudden went, you know what's most important? We are. I am. That's been true since the reality of man and woman showing up on the planet. We have been a me first people. I want what is mine. If you go back to the very beginning with God placing Adam and Eve in the garden, what was it that the enemy tempted Adam and Eve with when he came to them and Eve takes the fruit? What did the enemy say to her? God's not giving you what you deserve. He's not told you the whole truth. If you'll just eat of this fruit, you'll be like God. You'll be in control. You'll be in authority. And Adam and Eve together partook because they believed the lie that it was about them. When we get to John chapter 13, Jesus knows the world in which he lives. He knows the culture. He knows the honor. He knows the shame. He knows the way that the world works. And he's come to the earth as God in the flesh. Make no mistake that when we talk about the gospel, and I so appreciate what Clint said a moment ago about the power of the gospel, when we talk about Jesus, we're not talking about just somebody who was in history that did some really incredible things. We're talking about God in the flesh come to the earth, the creator of all things. John recognized Jesus as creator. Paul in Colossians 1 will later recognize Jesus as part of being there in the beginning when God created, and that God created things through him. And so the New Testament bears witness, and I would even argue the Old Testament bears witness, that Jesus has eternally existed. He did not come into being. He has always been in existence. He is God in the flesh. And so Jesus has come to the earth, and in John chapters 1 through 12, we've been seeing John make the case for Jesus as not just God in the flesh, but as the promised Messiah come to rescue his people. He's been inviting people to believe in him and to see him for who he is and all the things that go along with that. And so in those first 12 chapters, John's been unpacking for us this journey of Jesus towards this moment that John just keeps calling and Jesus just keeps saying, this hour, this day. You look back in the 12 chapters that we've covered so far, and so many times John and Jesus both say his hour had not yet come. The day was not yet. The time was not fulfilled. There's this moment in the Gospel of John that is coming, this moment that points to the reality of a cross and a tomb, that there is this hour that is coming, but in the first 12 chapters, it is not upon us. The Son of God has been here to heal and to teach and to draw to himself disciples, but in John chapter 13, the story is going to shift. And for John, there will be no looking back. The rest of John will be about this hour, this moment. And what we find is that Jesus is going to not live me first, as in give me what is mine. Jesus will live me first in the sense of giving his life as a ransom for many. You see, I think you and I need to live me first lives. Well, wait, preacher, you just said, I know what I just said. We need to live me first lives. But we need to live me first in the way that Jesus showed us to live me first. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Look at John chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. We'll just read the first few verses, and then we'll walk through this together. John chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God. Let me stop there. If you're a note taker, here's the first thing I want you to write down as we talk about me first living in light of who Jesus is. Number one, I want you to see what Jesus knew. Verses 1 through 3, that word know or that word knew appears over and over. What did Jesus know in this moment? As chapter 13 begins and as John is taking us towards the cross and the life of Jesus, what does Jesus know in this moment? Let me give you a few things. Number one, he says he knew that his hour had come. He knew that this was the moment. This moment began. There wasn't going to be a leaving of Jerusalem again. There wasn't going to be any more teaching on the hillside. Jesus knew that in this moment with his disciples, the journey to the cross was beginning. This would be the week that would end with nails through his hands and his feet, a crown of thorns upon his head. Jesus knew that his hour had come. And John says he knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. He knew this was going to happen. He knew what was taking place. So nothing that you and I will read in the rest of the Gospel of John will Jesus be caught by surprise by. He knows what is happening. He knows that he's leaving. He knows that he had to love his disciples, number 2. He said he having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. That term there translated in the English Standard Version, to the end, it means he loved them to the full. He loved them completely. Now I want you to think about this. These are disciples that in a matter of days are going to desert him. They're going to leave him. He's going to go to the cross and they're going to scatter. But in this moment at supper, Jesus loves them completely. He's just with them. He knows that the Father has given them to him, and so he's loved them completely. Jesus knew again that he had come from God in verse 3. He knew that he had come from God. You see, there's nobody in the room who knows who Jesus is like Jesus does. And he is God in the flesh in a room with mortal men eating supper and partaking of this thing together. And if anybody deserves to be the captain or the captive or the center of attention, I'll get it out in a minute. If anybody deserves to have the guest of honor position in this moment, there's no doubt about who it is. The disciples won't even argue that. If Jesus is present, he's the guy. He's the one that raised Lazarus. He's the one that spoke and the deaf man began to see. He touched the eyes of the blind man could see. Jesus is the man. They know this. Jesus knows who he is. He knows what's about to take place. But don't miss verse 2. Jesus also knew who was going to betray him. That's key for what happens next. In a room of men who will desert him and one who will ultimately betray him, Jesus loved them to the full. I've heard guys talk about this, and I'm not going to launch into a sidebar here, but I don't want you to miss this. Judas Iscariot is the betrayer of Jesus. That's his legacy in history. The one who traded Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, that handed him over to be murdered by the authorities. It's Judas, and Judas is in the room as Jesus is there with his disciples on this last week of his life, and John includes for us that Jesus loved to the end. Judas experienced what everybody else did. He experienced it all. Jesus knows that Judas is in the room. Jesus knows that his hour has come. Jesus knows that he is from God. He's going back to God. Jesus is sure of who he is and what's about to take place. So I don't want you to miss what Jesus knew. But here's the second thing you've got to see. I love the way that Warren Wiersbe says this. He says what Jesus knew caused Jesus to do what he did. So number 2, I want you to see what Jesus did. Before I read verse 4, now remember, Jesus knows who he is. Like if anybody deserves in this moment to be at rope drop, if anybody deserves to get all the attention and all the accolades, it's Jesus. Now watch what he does in verse 4. Jesus rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you don't understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I don't wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet. but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him, and that was why he said, not all of you are clean. Jesus, the one who should be the guest of honor, he's at this table, and you got to kind of have this picture in your mind. They didn't sit at the table like you and I would. If you come to my house, we're going to sit around a table. We're going to sit together in chairs, and our feet are going to be under us, and we're going to scoot up to the table and partake of the meal. But in this moment in the first century, you'll often see this word when it talks about the Last Supper or meals that Jesus ate with his disciples and other friends. You'll see the word, he reclined at the table. He reclined. The typical way of eating in this moment was not to sit at the table, but it was to lay on your side on a pillow with your feet behind you. And you would eat with your hands the food that was prepared in front of you. And so this is the scene that is going on. Jesus is reclined at the table with his disciples, and he's beginning this meal together with them. And all of a sudden, as everybody's talking, you know the chatter that goes on before the meal comes? That quiet moment when everybody's trying to figure out what we're going to talk about and what are we ordering. There's no ordering going on. There's just conversations happening. And while everybody's talking, waiting on the feast to begin, the meal to begin, Jesus quietly leans back, stands up, takes off his outer cloak, lays it down, and then he walks and grabs a towel. And he takes that towel and he wraps it around his waist and he tucks it in so that it won't fall. And then he does what nobody expected him to do. You see, you and I read Jesus washed the disciples' feet. We're like, oh, that was nice. That's kind of nice. I mean, Jesus just being a good guy. But you got to understand, the person who was responsible for this was not anybody at the table. Wherever this meal is happening, there should have been a servant. There should have been a servant whose job it would have been that as these men reclined at the table with their feet behind him, this servant was to come up behind them with this basin of water and to begin to clean their feet. And they didn't wear tennis shoes back then. They didn't wear boots. They wore sandals. And so everywhere they walked, when they walked down the road and when they walked in the yard, it was these open-toed sandals. And so as you can imagine, as you walked all day with your sandals on, that was the part of you that was the filthiest. And they were like us. They don't want all that at dinner. And so somebody's job would have been to go around the table and to clean the feet of the men who are eating there, or the folks that are there partaking in this meal. It would have been to clean this, but it would have been left to a servant, not to anybody who's at the table. And not only would it have just been a servant's job, but it would have been a job that's ignored. Because again, their feet aren't under the table, their feet are behind them. And with their feet behind them, they're just engaged in conversation. The servant would just do his thing. And the only way you would notice the servant was if the water was too hot, too cold, or they used a rag that had some scratchy spots on it. You would just ignore that. That was just part of the experience. It's kind of like a waiter coming up to your table and just pouring your water. Sometimes you don't even notice that they're there. They just make it happen and they disappear. This would have been the servant's job to just do that and disappear, because it wasn't a job that mattered to anybody sitting at the table. It was just something that needed to be done. And for whatever reason, it's not gotten done. And Jesus, knowing what he knew, doesn't look at Peter and say, Peter, go get that tub. He doesn't say, John, go grab a towel. Jesus doesn't say anything. He gets up, he rises from the crowd, he humbles himself, and he begins to serve. You say, Ben, I don't know that it's really that big a deal. Well, watch what Simon Peter does. Jesus begins to go around this table, wiping their feet with the water and taking the towel and drying them off. And it says, when he came to Simon Peter. Now, you got to love Peter, right? I know I hear preachers say that all the time, but you really do. I mean, the way that the text reads, Peter is not first. He's somewhere in the middle towards the end. So Jesus has gone around the table. And he gets to Peter, and Peter has a question. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? I mean, come on, Peter. Everybody else in front of you, Jesus has done this to. He says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus says, you don't understand what I'm doing, but afterward you will. Peter doesn't like that answer. He says, no, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. This is how we know that this job does not, in Peter's mind, this job could not belong to Jesus, because if anybody was going to wash feet, Jesus is the last one on the list. And so he looks at Jesus and says, no, Lord, you're not washing my feet. You're not touching my feet. Lord, that's reserved for somebody else, somebody whose name we don't know. That's reserved for a servant who doesn't really matter. Jesus, you can't wash my feet. And Jesus says, Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you've got no part with me. You're not a part of what I'm doing if I can't wash your feet. Peter says, Lord, if that's the case, then that's not just my feet that need washing, but I need you to wash my hands, and I need you to wash my head, because I'm not living the way I should. I'm not thinking the way I should. Jesus, I need you to clean all of me. And Jesus says, no, you don't need me to clean all of you. That's what I've been doing as you've walked with me. The one who has been walking with me, the one who is bathed, doesn't need a whole bath again. He just needs his feet washed, because where have his feet taken him? Into the streets and into the yard and into the dust and into the muck of life. He says you don't need your whole body washed, you just need your feet. And then again he makes this reference to someone who is not clean. And John tells us, verse 11, he knew who it was that was going to betray him. That's why he said, not all of you are clean. But don't miss this. Peter's rejection was, Lord, you can't wash my feet. You will never touch my feet. Why? Because that job doesn't belong to somebody who's as good as you are, Jesus. Jesus, you don't deserve that job. That is beneath you. And not only is it beneath you, but it's beneath us. That's why none of the other disciples had thought about it. Somebody else was just supposed to do it. Somebody else was just supposed to rise to the occasion or sink to the occasion, if you would, and to take care of that, and nobody else did. And then the very one in the room who was least deserving of that low position was the one who rose and said, I'll do it. He just started doing it. And Jesus didn't even announce it to him. Guys, this is going to shock you. I'm going to wash your feet. Like, he doesn't announce it. He just starts doing it. I just have to think that if this is the day and age in which we live, there would have been people who would have looked at this and said, look, what Jesus did was good. But his mistake was he didn't take a selfie. Like, he really should have got a picture of himself in the towel with the water as he kneels to wash his disciples' feet. If he would have just gotten a picture of himself, then people would have known what he was doing. People would have said, man, look at Jesus. Just a lowly servant. That wasn't what Jesus was concerned with. He wanted his disciples to see it's not what everybody else thinks, it's what needs to be done. It's what needs to be done. And Jesus just did it, kneeling to wash their feet. But then he also, look at whose feet he washed. Again, Jesus knows. That's what it says in the first 3 verses. He knew what was going on. He knew what was happening. And yet he washed the feet of the men who would leave him. It's interesting that the foot washing doesn't take place after the resurrection of Jesus. It takes place before, when all of their mistakes and all of their sins in front of them. Jesus washes their feet. But he doesn't just wash the feet of the disciples who will desert him. Verse 11 reminds us that he washed the feet of the one who would betray him. I wonder, I don't know this, it's just purely speculation on my part. I wonder, after the betrayal of Judas, when guilt set in on him, I wonder if this was one of the moments that caused him to regret what he had just done. I don't know. But we know that Judas, after he betrays Jesus, he takes his own life because he's riddled with guilt. How could I have betrayed this man? How could I have done this? And I wonder if this isn't a moment that Judas thought about when he's reclining at the table and the very man that he was going to betray still washed his feet. Because when Jesus said things like, not all of you are clean, or one of you will betray me, do you know who in the room knew it was about to happen? Judas. Judas knew. All the other disciples were like, is it me? Is it you? Who is it? Get Jesus to tell us who it is. Judas didn't have to ask that question. He knew who it was going to be. And yet Jesus washed the feet of Jesus. Jesus took the form of a servant. It's what Paul will say in Philippians chapter 2. He took the form of a servant, emptying himself. And here in chapter 13 of John, we get the picture of what Jesus had done for his disciples and for us. And so Jesus washes all of their feet. And then you get to verse 12. And in John chapter 13, verse 12, it says this. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Here's the third thing I want you to see. What Jesus knew led to what Jesus did, and what Jesus did tells us this. Number 3, following Jesus will always lead to serving others. Jesus washes their feet, he puts on his clothes, and then he reclines at the table again. He reclines at the table again. And he asks the disciples, do you know what I've done for you? Do you understand? Nobody says a word because they don't. They're still trying to process, why would Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, their leader, why would he do this for them? So Jesus tells them, look, you call me teacher and Lord. And you're right, that's who I am. I'm the one teaching you about God. I'm the one leading you. I am your Savior. I am your master. That's who I am. I'm not ignoring that. I'm not telling you that you've been wrong all this time. I'm telling you, you've got that part right. But you've missed it. See, one of the other gospel writers will tell us that one of the conversations that was happening around the table before Jesus got up to wash feet, they were arguing amongst themselves about one thing. Who was going to be the greatest in Jesus' kingdom? They were arguing about it. Now, not loud enough where Jesus could hear. If you're a parent, your kids have done this for you, right? You've walked in a room or you've been in a car ride and you hear it in the background and you have no idea what's going on. But it's low enough that you're like, something's up. The disciples are having that kind of argument. Jesus hasn't heard all of those things, but he's Jesus, so he knows. That's kind of an unfair advantage he has over us parents, right? Jesus knows it. But they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest because they know that Jesus is this king and he's got this kingdom he's talked about. And so which one of us is going to be the greatest in the kingdom, and how can we jockey and position ourselves so that we can be first in the kingdom? It's that old me first mentality, right? James and John, the sons of thunder, man, they want to sit on Jesus' right and left, and man, they want to call down fire on the enemies of Jesus, and they want to be these two kind of guys that are like the body or the security guards for Jesus. They want to have those positions. So they argue with other disciples about who's going to be where. And it's this me first mentality. I want to be first, and I want to be in the best position, and I want Jesus to know my name, and I want to make sure I get what I want, and I want to be taken care of. And so they've been having this argument, and in the midst of that argument, Jesus stands up, washes their feet. They don't know what to do with it. He says, guys, you've been arguing and you've been jockeying for position. You think it's about getting ahead, and you think it's about you and your name and your legacy and your power and your authority. He says, but if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example. You know what an example is, right? It's not just a picture that shows you what could be. An example is what shows you how things are. I've joked from time to time that I'm not very good at putting things together, but one of the things I'm very legalistic about in some ways is when those instructions come, I pull them out. And I want to know now, hey, I've made enough mistakes in my life that I don't just need the box to come, me open it and put it together and hope for the best. Like, I've made enough mistakes putting things together that now I read the instructions. And in those instructions, it's not just the words I'm looking for. I want the picture. Like, show me that when I put this thing together, this is what it looks like. I remember vividly one of my girls' first Christmases, or maybe Abby was 4 or 5 years old. She wanted this Barbie cruise ship. And I thought, whatever, Barbie's in my house. I've got one girl or two girls at this point. Girl life, girl dad is just what I am. Barbie cruise ship for Christmas, here we go. And she gets the Barbie cruise ship, it comes in, and we've got to do some things that night, getting it all ready to go out the next morning. And I remember opening that box and like, okay, it's a cruise ship. But can I just tell you that there were 732,168 stickers that had to be placed on this boat. And I couldn't do it. I was so frustrated. Like, the sticker don't even fit. It's not going to look right. My gracious wife comes out, takes the book and says, this is where they go, shows me the picture. But I tried things like that. An example is, let me show you what it's going to look like. Jesus in this moment is telling his disciples, what I've just done for you is not the exemption to the rule. What I've just done for you in washing your feet as your Lord and teacher, what I've just done for you, that's what it looks like to be with me. That's what it looks like to follow me. There should never be a moment in the life of a Christian where we stand up and beat our chest and say, no, we deserve to be first. No, the way of the church, the way of Christ has always been, let me find the things that must be done. Let me do those things, whether anybody ever knows my name or not. Me first. I'll serve first. That's what Jesus has just shown them. He says, look, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. And Jesus says in verse 17, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. You see, I think verse 17 is really a lot of our problems when it comes to following Jesus. Okay, let me just get personal with you for a moment. My biggest struggle in my walk with Jesus is not knowing what I should do. My biggest struggle in my relationship with Jesus is not knowing what I should do. My biggest struggle in my everyday following of Jesus is knowing what I should do and still not doing it. We want to take that off of following Jesus. No, it's just about knowing the right things and making sure you're at church when you can, and you agree with the preacher. You be nice to the preacher. You sing a little bit. You give a little bit. And, you just kind of go through the motions. And Jesus says, no, you're not blessed because you know the right things. You're blessed when you do the right things. And in this moment, he's telling his disciples that following me is serving one another. It's seeing how you can give yourself away to the people around you. He's challenging them to serve rather than to be the ones, who are served. The argument of the disciples was they wanted attention. Jesus here challenges them. Don't seek attention. Be humble. They want authority. Jesus wants them to lead by example. You see, the invitation of Jesus here in these verses is not live your life me first in getting, but live your life me first in serving. There's a lot of things to unpack in that passage, but I think the example of Jesus here for us, you see what he told his disciples is still true today. And as you've tracked church history, you watch the moments that the followers of Jesus have had the greatest influence in their culture and in their time on the planet is not when they are living me first, look at us, give us what we deserve. When the church is most powerful is not when they're in the White House, but when they're at the altar and on their knees serving in the ditches of people who needed them. Check it. Greatest moments in history are not when Rome says Christianity is the official religion of the known world. You know what happened in Rome back then when they made Christianity the religion of Rome? Killed it. It killed it. Well, man, that's an oversimplification. It killed it. The places that the church began to grow was not in Rome at that point. It was outside of there, because all of a sudden, the people who didn't get to experience the goodness of being in Rome found out that what the goodness was not in their rights, but in the goodness of God. The church is most powerful when it lives me first in serving, not me first in getting. And so, church, let me ask you two questions as we close this morning. Number one, if you're a note taker, write this question down. If not, just think about it. How does what Jesus knew and what he did challenge what you believe about your own life? How does knowing what Jesus did in this moment, what he knew before he did it and what he actually did, how does that challenge what you believe about your own life and your own pursuits? And then here's the second one. See, I think the practical part of this is really, really simple. Sometimes I think I read verses and I'm not sure what to do or how to do. But Jesus is pretty straightforward here. I've given you an example that you should do just as I've done to you. So here's my second question. Who and how can you serve somebody that doesn't deserve it this week? Who and how can you serve this week? Is there somebody that you can do something for? Maybe it's a cup of coffee. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe it's a text message. Maybe it's a meal. Maybe it's just listening to their story. But who can you serve this week? This is the way of Jesus. Following Jesus leads to serving others. If our following of Jesus is only leading to our life being more comfortable and more secure, and it's not influencing and impacting people towards the kingdom, let me just give you a thought. It's probably not Jesus we're following. It's probably not Jesus we're following if we're not serving the people around us. Well, Ben, I don't really think that's what he said. I don't know how to make it any more plain. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Church, you live in a me-first world when it comes to getting things. But if you want to see God work in your life, if you want to see people around you see the beauty of the gospel, it's me first in serving so that they might experience what God has done for us. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for this morning. God, I still am I'm captivated by this picture. Father, the Son of God, with all that he had accomplished and all that was still in front of him, in this moment where he needed his friends to love him and to surround him and to encourage him and to help him. God, in this moment, he didn't ask for any of those things, but he rose from the table and he did what was necessary. Jesus, you told us that you did it so that it would be an example for us to do the same for others. God, I confess in my own life so many times I get caught up in what I'm dealing with, what I think that I need. God, I live me first and what I can get from you and from other people. And Father, this week God, you've begun to shift that in my heart. God, would you help me again to be a person that lives me first in serving, not in getting. Not because you don't want me to experience good things, but because I have experienced good things. God, you're not withholding from us. Father, we sang about your goodness today. And Father, even in Psalm 23, David said that goodness and mercy would follow us all the days of our life. Father, you're not withholding, but because we've experienced your goodness, God, we can now serve. Because we're not worried about tomorrow. We're not worried about our provision. God, we're not worried about our future because we belong to you. And so, Father, I pray that you would help us to be challenged by your word today. And then, God, I pray you would help us to walk in obedience this week. Father, would you help us to see someone, to listen to someone, to engage with someone, that we might serve them in the way that you have served us. That, God, we might lead them to know you the way that we know you. That, God, they might experience your love through us. Because, God, we know that following Jesus always leads us to serving others. So, God, I'll live. And would you help us all to live me first in serving. In Jesus' name, amen.